So we know that all the Christians will recognize their error when the true Mashiach comes, because the Navi tells us that in the end of days, the golden Gentiles will come to you and will say, we've made a terrible mistake. They will all know the truth. It's very critical. All the nations will recognize their error, and they'll come to the Jews. See Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 19 and 20, and the Gentiles will come to you and they will say, surely we've inherited lies and vanity where there is no truth. How can one make unto himself gods when they are not?
Welcome to TaNaCh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsville, Texas, USA, with another episode of Rabbi Tovia Singer's Let's Get Biblical Q&A. Welcome you back to our studio. Rabbi, good to have you back.
Always good to have me on. Always. Big pleasure.
That goes without saying. That's right. Okay, that's good. That's good.
Why don't people get tired of that? I don't know, but that's how it goes.
They will not get tired of you. That's never going to happen. They might get tired of me. I'm just kidding.
No.
You don't get tired of me. You love me, right?
I do.
Okay,
I
good.
do.
Good.
Despite your many enormous flaws, I have to put up with you. What do I do?
That's funny.
I
should have had you recording earlier. Whenever we were talking, you said, William, I don't see you on your camera, and you said, thank God, because that would be. I'm just kidding. I don't remember what you said.
All right, we don't have to discuss all our conversations with the whole universe.
Hey, I'm going to record it. I need to put together one show that's got like all of the first couple minutes of each show, and that's all that's in it. No content, just all the silly stuff you and I talk about. May do that one of these days.
Yeah,
so.
Whatever you can do. Whatever
Awesome.
you could do to raise the awareness. Anyway, it's always good.
Okay, good. Well, welcome back, Rabbi. That's for sure.
It's always a pleasure.
So,
big pleasure.
We will get right into our first topic here. I'm actually adjusting your screen. It dropped on me a little bit. There we go. That's better.
There we go.
And here we go. Let's get this baby rolling. Nope. Music's still playing, Bart. Bear with me 1 second.
It's all right. It takes years to master this complicated. I don't think
people really don't realize how complicated it actually is.
I just thank God you're not employed by United Airlines. Go for it. Go.
Here we go. Crazy.
Unless you clean.
Come on, everybody. My name is Ira. I'm from Long Island, New York. And before I go on with my question, I just want to say thank you to both of you. You guys are helping to bring back so many people. Like myself, I'm a Jew, but I lost the song, the beauty of the TaNaCh. And Rabbi has brought it back to me. Rabbi, my question is this. Isn't it like, I know it's not, I mean, maybe it is. Do rabbis have to be married? That's the question. And the question I ask is because in the new Bible that these Christian Jews, they keep calling him rabbi. They call this guy Jesus rabbi. Rabbi. So I'm thinking he must be married, and if he's married, where's his wife? Where's his kids? So maybe you can answer that for me. Todah Rabah, Rabbi.
Beautiful.
I'm praying for your dad.
That's sweet. So, yeah, isn't the Messiah supposed to have kids according to prophecy as well?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I don't know if we've ever had that question. Thank you so much for your blessings for my dad. He definitely keep praying for my father, Shlomo Zalman HaKohen Ben Leah. So this is an intriguing question. So it is a mitzvah in the Torah to get married and have children. So it is a one would expect, doesn't have to be a rabbi, just would expect a religious Jew to have a family, and as it turns out, this is very intriguing. There's no mention anywhere in the Christian Bible that Jesus didn't have a wife and children. Although Christians and even non-Christians just presume that he never had a wife and children. So I think it's just part of the Christian culture that, well, of course he didn't have a wife, of course he didn't have kids. And what's striking is that if Christians were to discover, hypothetically, that Jesus was married and had children, it would sort of blow up the whole religion. And you're going, well, why would that be? Because Christians view their saints as celibate. And that's a virtue in the Christian Bible. It's most famously expressed, celibacy is most famously expressed as a virtue by Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And Paul claims to have been celibate and encourage others to be like him if they can. So Paul, 1 Corinthians 7, that's like an indisputed letter of Paul, says it's best if you can just be like me. If your passions are as such, then it's better to be married than to burn. In the context, he does tell, spouses to be good to each other. It's not, but he definitely holds that not being married is a virtue, which is completely not Jewish. As the Torah says, in fact, it comes up very quickly in the Torah that you should, as a command, to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the world. It's open mitzvah. Moreover, and this is where it gets very strange, moreover, in TaNaCh, we are told that the Mashiach himself is going to have a family, going to have children. And you'll find that at the end of the book of Ezekiel, exactly where you would expect to find it. The last section of the entire book of Ezekiel is messianic, is about the messianic age. That's how Ezekiel ends. I mean, explosive chapters from 34 all the way through 48. And there's much more messianic stuff going on in Yechezkel, but this is just unparalleled passages. And in chapter 47 of Yechezkel, the prince who is mentioned, enumerated, he's the Mashiach, enumerated, I think it's 21 times in this section alone. He's called the Nasi. One of the things I've shared with you in the past is that although the word Mashiach appears in TaNaCh 39 times in the Hebrew, it's never referring to who we call the Mashiach. It's referring to a number of people, usually priests. The word appears in Leviticus more frequently because it's referring to Kohanim, to priests like myself. But Yechezkel refers to the Mashiach as the Nasi. That's very important. See Ezekiel 34, and also go to Ezekiel chapter 37, Valley of Dry Bones, and specifically verse 24 and 25. That's the Mashiach. He's called David. He's the Nasi. He's the prince. All Christians hold that Ezekiel 37, 24, and 25 states Nasi. It reads in all the Christian translations as prince, and that's how Mashiach is discussed throughout. And the key part that we're very curious about, that is directly germane to your question, is Ezekiel chapter 47, chapter 46, verse 16 and 17. So there you have the children of the Mashiach being discussed. The context is inheritance, okay? So the Mashiach is definitely going to be a married person. And then we get into the weird part about what's the deal with Jesus. So there's no mention of Jesus not having a wife and children, and it's just people assume that was the case. It's not just that fundamentalist Christians assume that he wasn't married, had children. It seems to be just people just assume that's the case. The only source for that is Matthew 19. It's not like Jesus says, I don't have a wife and children, or anything like that. But in Matthew 19, verses 10, 11. So Jesus, there we are told, I don't believe the historical Jesus said this, that he extols the virtue of not being married, of being a eunuch, whether you make yourself that way or through natural reasons you're not having children, that is virtuous. So it's something very odd that there's virtue in not getting married, intrinsic virtue in it. So this is problematic. It's much more explicit, as I said, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. It's not the only place. So Paul definitely did not have a spouse who was a woman. That's all I can tell you. More than that, I can't tell you. So right, so that's a very big issue. It's a very big issue because it's a mitzvah from the Torah. Now about him being called Rabbi. So he is called Rabbi quite a bit. I think Jesus is called Rabbi. He's given that title, Rabbi. I think about 17 or 18 times in the entire Christian Bible. Strikingly, I think he's called Rabbi more frequently in the book of John. In a way, the least, this is going to be misunderstood, but the least Jewish of the Gospels, in a sense, means the most highly developed of the Gospels. John is just, is filled with sort of contradictions in that we have this high Christology, the prologue, and then you have terms like rabbi being used a considerable number of times in the book of John. So that's unusual. The word Messiah used, not Christos, but literally Messiah, transliterated in the Greek. So so we do have Jesus being called Rabbi. We also have Jesus saying that no one should be called a rabbi in Matthew 23. I don't know how the Messianic movement gets around that because they call everybody a rabbi. So in short, the Mashiach would have a wife, children. We see that in Yechezkel. It's a mitzvah it's a commandment to have children. And the problem, of course, always comes down to the following, and that is the historical Jesus, like who is the real historical Jesus? The problem in answering that question is we have no non-Christian sources for that. So, but certainly the church came to believe that Jesus was never married and certainly never had children. That would be completely, utterly incompatible with the image of Jesus, or that, and that's why the notion that Mary, who Roman Catholics celebrate and the Orthodox, the Roman Catholics venerate and the Orthodox do as well. Mary is portrayed as someone who did not engage in any intimate activity throughout her life. And anyways, it goes on and on, right? So none of this is compatible with TaNaCh at all. It is compatible with Gnostic ideas, Manichaeist ideas that would sort of cook. Augustine famously comes from the world of Manichaeism, a complete separation from the pleasures of this world. So that's where the New Testament finds itself theologically, culturally, not in Jerusalem. Anyways, thank you for your question.
And everybody can hear me now. I'm registering. Very good. Okay, go ahead with your question. Got David. You called in last week, I believe, but you got a good question, so go right ahead.
So something happening?
Yep, go ahead. You're live on the air.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm David from Morristown. I called in last week, and if I call in next week, it's going to be a chazaka, and I'm going to have to keep calling in every week then.
That's all right.
Yeah, I'm davening for your father.
Thank you.
Gimel Thomas is in a few days, so I'm going to be waiting on that long line. I'm going to bring him into the Rebbe. So my question is, Gospel of Thomas, what's the deal with that? And why is it that both the Quran and Toldos Yeshu use parts that use certain details from it, specifically the clay birds, in their stuff, while mainstream Christianity is staying far away from it? So what's the deal with that? That's it.
All right, good question.
Okay, go ahead and hang on down to the answer. Thank you for your call. Bye.
All right. I'll see ya.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So the Gospel of Thomas is a book that we knew existed and was discovered not that long ago. But we there are many books that were discussed by the church fathers that were lost. Because if it didn't make it into the canon and it wasn't heavily revered, then scribes are not going to copy it. I know this is hard to imagine, but in the ancient world, if you wanted a book, it had to be written by hand. That's what the word manuscript literally means, written by hand. Imagine you wanted a book, someone had to write it. So what was the incentive to write, to copy an entire book by hand? And you didn't want to, all right, they didn't have paper, but you had to, a scribe would copy a book only on something that was durable. And, vellum would be very expensive. There were plants that could be used. So the Gospel of Thomas is an interesting book that we now have a good deal of it. And it essentially is I think it's 114 sayings of Jesus. I should be right about that. And it's possibly very old because the Gospel of Thomas contains a lot of sayings of Jesus. The church came to reject the Gospel of Thomas because they believed it had a Gnostic underbelly, underpinning. And Gnosticism, while popular, and in fact affected Paul and the writers of the Christian Bible, Christian Gnosticism exploded in the 2nd century and came to be a noted so-called heresy, and then the church would fight it. And any book they thought that reeked of Gnosticism or even smelled like Gnosticism, they would ban it. Why did the Quran pick up on material found in that book? I can't tell you why. I can't tell you. There are texts in the Gospel of Thomas that are shared by the 4 Gospels in the Christian Bible. And so therefore it was out there, material was out there, so, I can't tell you. I don't know that anyone knows the answer to that question specifically. The Gospel of Thomas is kind of thought to be older than the Gospels. It's kind of like a Q document, which means it's sayings, it's steeped in sayings. So the algorithm is I want to take back the word algorithm. The presupposition in scholarship always runs like this. The more miracles you have, the more developed and later it is. And the earlier stuff should be made up of Jesus walking around and saying things, teachings, being a teacher. And that's what Q is, teacher. And that's what the Gospel of Thomas is, kind of sayings of Jesus. It's possible that there was a Papias who was a church father from the 2nd century. So he says that there was some Hebrew or Aramaic book that contained the logi, which means the words, the sayings of Jesus. That does not survive. If Papias is even accurate, Papias is regarded as important. First of all, nothing that Papias wrote survives. It's just that later church fathers discuss him very significantly. 4th century church father, who was the historian of the church, mentions him and mentions Irenaeus's reliance on him. So that's why I think it's the sayings of Jesus. So people think that the Gospel of Thomas could actually, its original version of it, could be old because of its nature. And the basic thinking is that if you if you accept as a postulate that Jesus was some sort of teacher from the Upper Galilee running around teaching stuff, so that would represent an earlier iteration of Christianity, and that he would be running around just doing incredible miracles. So that would be much more developed. So this is just so we all know, we're now in the world of the humanities, okay? Always keep that in mind whenever discussing when a book is written, what was the reason behind it and so on. This is not a hard science. This is not like you could reproduce it, you could be replicated. That kind of gold standard that's used in the hard sciences can't be done in the humanities. Moreover, bear in mind that in this topic of biblical studies and so on, I would say every 30 years, scholars just change their view. It just swings like a pendulum. So you have to bear that in mind. Like that cigarettes cause cancer and other horrible diseases is not debated. But these other issues are hotly debated because it's a soft science. It's the humanities. And people should, even though the scholars of this time, there are scholars of the Gospel of Thomas. People do their dissertations on this. But it is the humanities. So, you could just give it the best shot. Less development, and so on. So thank you so much for your question.
Okay, caller, you're live on the air. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, hi. First of all, Rabbi, saying a referral Shalema for your dad.
Thank you.
And it's Shelby from New York City. Okay, my question is this. With all the talk about Jesus' second coming, I'm wondering how when the real Mashiach comes, that they won't claim that is Jesus in his second coming.
Right.
That's pretty clever. Okay. Thank you, Shelby, for your call. Go ahead and hang them down to you if you answer. Thank you.
So thank you for your question. And with your permission, I'm going to answer it in the way that I would like to, because there's a number of approaches to your question. But the question is, how do we know that the rest of the world will recognize they've made a mistake? In the case you're describing, you're speaking about the world's largest religion. The religion has the most adherents, Christianity. About 1/3 of the world, the planet's population, is a Christian in some way. So we know that all the Christians will recognize their error when the true Mashiach comes, because the Navi tells us that in the end of days, the golden Gentiles will come to you and will say, we've made a terrible mistake. They will all know the truth. It's very critical. All the nations will recognize their error, and they'll come to the Jews. See Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 19 and 20, and the Gentiles will come to you and they will say, surely we've inherited lies and vanity where there is no truth. How can one make unto himself gods when they are not? Zechariah 8:23. That's the last passage of the 8th chapter of Zechariah. 10 Gentiles of different nations and different peoples will be mechazik, will grab the Kanaf Yehudi, the hem of a Jew. It's interesting that they'll grab the hem of a Jew. Why are they grabbing the hem of a Jew? Because Jews don't know what to do with non-Jews. I'm being frank. Jews are, because of 2,000 years of horrible exile and relationship, Jews are like, what do we do with you Gentiles? So it's like, I'm not letting go. And I have a lot of non-Jews, who say, I'm just not letting go. So that's what's really going on. The Jews are going, what do we do with Noachai? It's like, and we see that happening today. And they're going to say, Nelcha imochem, let us go with you. Ki shamanu, because we have heard, ki shama, same word, we have heard that God is with you, right? And the nations will be astounded, and they'll all recognize their mistake. They'll put their hands over their mouths in disbelief. They'll Because everything they are witnessing in the Messianic age is like nothing they'd ever considered. In fact, that's Isaiah 52:15, which is the incipit, which is the introduction to Isaiah 53. Mamish, if people would pay attention to that, everyone will be fine. The introduction to Isaiah 83 is, so shall he cast down many nations. This is the verse before it. So 53:1, go back one verse, you're now in Isaiah 52, verse 15. So shall he cast down many nations. Kings will shut their mouths. Because for that which had not been told to them, they will understand, which they never considered, they'll finally hear. And they'll ask the question, what's the Hebrew Isaiah 53? What's the opening three words? Mi hemin lishmuasenu. Mi hemin, who would have believed shmuasenu, our, right? Our, plural, our report, shmua. It's the same word. Isn't that delicious? Isn't that delightful? Isn't that yummy? So the word kisham, Zechariah 8:23, right? Isaiah 52:15, same word Shema. It's like nothing we'd ever heard. Complete shock, complete surprise. And they say, who would ever believe? We would never believe such a thing. And you could see today where Christians will go, I can't believe the Jews were right all along. And then Isaiah, I'm not going there because we're going to go out of the way, but Isaiah 83 then contains the soliloquy of what the Gentiles will say when Mashiach comes, specifically about the issue of why did the Jews suffer. We thought the Jews suffered because they didn't accept our religion, our prophet, our demigod. Now we know they were right all along. Why did they suffer? And they come to two explanations for Jewish suffering. Number one, Jewish suffering is the result of their bad behavior. And Jewish suffering caused them to do tshuva, to repent. Not vicarious atonement. There's no vicarious atonement. But Jewish suffering causes many goyim to rethink themselves. And we're seeing that today. Think about just the last 85 years. That's from the Holocaust to today. And think about the 85 years prior to World War II, right? You can't compare the two. How many Christians have left the church in the last 85 years since the Holocaust and have become B'nai Noach or converted to Judaism? How many non-Jews left the church in the 85 years prior to World War II? It's incomparable. And it should be the opposite. We should find a tremendous amount of conversion to Judaism, I don't know, in the 19th century. There was no Holocaust. There were terrible things that happened to Jews in the 19th century. But nothing on that scale. So people say, well, why not be a Jew? No, it's dafka after the Jews suffer so much, then the goyim say we want to become a Jew. Crazy, really, really. The only thing is TaNaCh says so. Isn't that gorgeous the way TaNaCh works? So when Mashiach comes, all the nations will understand. Why? Because the key role of Mashiach is to be a teacher. It's so simple. And you're from the United States, and you're a Jew. But despite this, you grew up in a Christian country. You know, what do you mean Christian country? It's a Christian country. I mean, Christmas is a national holiday. It's a federal holiday. It is a Christian country. You get a separation. Oh, it's founding father. It comes from Christianity. That has a very big effect on people. It really does. And people it's hard to distance yourself. But we are actually now observing a spectacle of millions of people worldwide who were former Christians who are now becoming B'nai Noach or converting to Judaism. Right now. And if you would ask me that question in the 19th century, and I told you that there'll be hundreds of thousands, millions of people who are Christians who are joining the Jewish people, either as B'nai Noach, Noachites, or converting to Judaism, you would say, all right, the Bible says so, and I have to have faith where it just sounds too fantastic to believe. But I say this to you, my dear sister, we are living now where we can hear the footsteps of Mashiach, which means that it's unfolding now as we're speaking now. It's happening right now because we're in that process. And if again, Isaiah chapter 2, the Mashiach is going to do what? He's going to give hoichacha, which means rebuke, teach, and he's v'shofat, and he's going to judge. That's it. No miracles, nothing, not a word. There's only 6 words in Isaiah 2 that describes what the Mashiach does, and we see again in Isaiah chapter 11, the Mashiach is going to judge, not from the spirit that Hashem puts upon him. He's going to have that wisdom and understanding. So
Yes.
I would say this to you, that in reality, we're living in a time where it really requires no faith whatsoever, or very little faith, to understand how the non-Jews will recognize their mistake. Because what's happening now, which just don't know the numbers, hundreds of thousands of Christians are coming to the Jewish faith, millions. It's happening now, so it doesn't require faith. This is what's unfolding. That's the nature of Judaism. It's that gold standard of being able to make outrageous predictions, and they happen. And please God, we should see the prophecy that all the nations will speak b'safa beruda, in a pure speech. See Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9. Thank you so much for your question.
Caller, sit tight. I'll be back with you in just a minute. Gustavo, you're live. Go right ahead with your question, sir.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. I just want to say that I really, really appreciate your time and your teachings. Now, my question is regarding 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verses 29, where Paul says, "Now, if there is no resurrection, what will those do who are baptized for the dead?" Having myself grown up Mormon in the LDS church, I was always taught that the Jewish people used to do this, but eventually, because they were wicked, this is what we were taught, that they lost this ceremony. And it was until Paul and then later Joseph Smith that through the restoration of everything, that we were able to have this teaching back, and now that's why Mormons do baptize for the dead. Now my question is this really something that ancient Israelites used to do? Or please, Rabbi, can you just tell us what we should understand by this? Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, well, don't hang up, please. Don't hang up, because I didn't really understand you. Your question is the practice of the LDS Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, their practice of baptizing people posthumously. Is that a practice that we find in Judaism? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. That's my question, because ever since I was little, I was always taught that that's something that ancient Israelites did, but they lost.
Got it. I got it.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
All
Go
right.
ahead and hang up now and tune in for your answer. Thank you so much. Okay.
So this is a practice that's unique to the LDS Church, not completely unique to them, but very widely practiced, and that's why the LDS Church, does all this genealogical research that everybody uses, because they want to baptize everybody, and they even baptized Hitler and Eva Braun years ago. It was absolutely scandalous. And then they started baptizing Holocaust Jews who were murdered during the Holocaust, which was incredibly offensive to the Jewish community, you can imagine. And the church, under pressure, said that, okay, if it's that offensive, we won't do it. No, there's nothing like this in Judaism at all, that there's any way to baptize or do anything to save somebody's soul after they died. After a person dies, so then as soon as they're buried, their soul ascends to heaven and stands before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. See Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 7. Okay? However, there's something that's very different, but you might as well know this. And that is, if a person inspires another to worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to be loyal to Hashem, And that person, as a result, turns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and begins to be Mekayim mitzvot, to fulfill commandments, and to be inspired. So every mitzvah that person performs inspires, fills the neshama of the person who transmitted it. So a person is rewarded when that person brings another person to know about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every mitzvah they do, they're rewarded. And we see in Ezekiel chapter 33, that's very important to guide people and such a thing. So there is only one concept. It's nothing to do with the LDS Church. But what does it mean when people say Kaddish for the dead, meaning saying a mourner's prayer? And what does it mean when Jewish people consider and contemplate what those who have passed on, how they've inspired them, and then perform mitzvahs in their merit because that person has raised me up, right? Very frequently, because of my grandfather, Olav HaShalom, and my uncle, Olav HaShalom, they inspired me deeply. My grandmother, Leah, she, inspired me deeply. So every mitzvah I perform, because they inspired me, and I recall that, so it gives them an aliyas neshama, but that's direct. It raises up their soul because they spiritually benefit from it. So I know that question will come in. So it's true. You can raise the neshama of the person who passed on if you contemplate how that person deeply affected you in your life, guided you in your life, and then you perform mitzvahs. So it's not like I can do something and help the dead in doing some ritual. No. But they do receive schar, they do receive reward, they do have an aliyas neshama, which means an elevation of their soul, whatever that means, because I am doing those things that they inspired me to do. I mean, you can only imagine Rashi, every moment his lips are moving, and Rashi is all these people who are saying Zuk the Halik Rashi and learning his commentary. So, he is elevated from this, although he was nifter. He died in the year 1104 or 1105. So the posthumous baptism is just nonsensical, but there is a way to elevate those who have passed on. But it's direct. It's not some vicarious weird stuff. Okay? So thank you so much for your thoughtful question.
Okay, Brian, you're live. Go ahead, brother.
Hello, guys. It's really good to hear from you guys. I'm Brian from Florida.
Welcome.
My question is regarding the justification of works that Paul claims, how Christians go by his word and say, well, no matter how many good works you do, your sins will always outweigh them. Therefore, you won't have eternal life. Now, people without any knowledge of the TaNaCh, it seems that they're just set up for failure by Paul, Jews and non-Jews alike. How would the rabbi deconstruct Paul's arguments and prove that truly God is a merciful God that does not require any sort of sacrifice of a person? Thank you, Rabbi.
All right, thank you.
Okay, go ahead and hang up now until you answer. Thank you.
So Paul claims frequently that the Torah itself, the commandments, the ritual commandments, has no purpose whatsoever except to let you know that you're a sinner. He says that. And he's not talking about Gentiles, as is widely assumed. People want to find a way that we can all get along. So there's a lot of ecumenical stuff that's set out there that's not accurate. Paul thought it was a bad idea for anyone to be keeping ritual laws, which have no intrinsic value. The point, in Paul's view, why there are ritual commandments, like why then have them? Why did God ever give them? It's really to let you know that you're a sinner. and then you would turn to Jesus. That's the hope. But it really is a fifth wheel. It has no purpose whatsoever. See Ephesians 2, see Colossians 2. Now, this idea does creep in to the Christian Bible, like in particularly, I could think of like the book of the book of Mark, chapter 7. You have relics of this in the Gospels, particularly in the book of Mark. You have other things too, but that one's really pretty strong. How could you upend that? You upend it because the Torah tells us openly that everyone will be keeping all the commandments when the Mashiach comes. I'm not kidding. It's exactly the opposite of what TaNaCh says. Shabbos is forever. It's O.C. Leolam. See Exodus chapter 31, verse 16 to 17. The secret thing belongs to the Lord, but that which has been revealed belongs to us and our children forever, that we may keep all the words of this law. That's the last passage of Deuteronomy chapter 29. The Torah openly tells us that what is good, what is a successful man. Look at how the book of Ecclesiastes ends, how it closes. What does God want? He wants you to be loyal to his mitzvot and to humbly observe them. When the author of the book of Malachi is signing off, the author of the book of Malachi lived during the Persian Empire. That's very late. That's the end, right? He knows he's saying goodbye for now. So the prophetic part of Jewish history is coming to a close, right? And he says, Zichru Torah Moshe. Remember the Torah of Moshe. It's the opposite of Paul. Paul is repeatedly stating that the law has been made a curse for us, and in his conversation with Jews, I'm steel manning this. You ask yourself, where's Paul talking to Jews? There's a number of places. Very famous place is in his most influential book, the book of Romans. In Romans chapter 7, Paul is speaking to Jews in Rome. He's never met them. He's going to travel to Rome and probably travel on to Spain. But when he wrote the book of Romans, he had not yet visited. And he's speaking to Jews there. And he's saying that there's no reason for you to be keeping the Torah. Exactly the opposite of what TaNaCh says. He says, and he compares it to a woman whose spouse died. She's no longer bound by the marital vows that she made to her deceased husband. Paul says it, and he in fact explains, keep reading that chapter, again, Romans 7, that he only knew about the law, and, retract that, he only knew that he was a sinner, paraphrasing, when he discovered the law, which is very intriguing, which again points to the notion that Paul was not a Pharisee, and later in life came to become familiar with Pharisaic practices. Because if you grew up in a religious Orthodox home, which is what generally people think about Paul, then you know about the first things you know about as a child is the mitzvot. Even little boys, after they're 3 years old, which means that's when there is a special responsibility to teach your child, to give the child chinuch. We'll put tzitzis on little children. You don't come to find out that bacon is forbidden, when you're 26 years old. You just know these things are not kosher. These things you make a blessing on. These are the commandments and so on. So you see there that Paul really did not grow up in a Pharisaic world. As is he represents and as is presented in. So how could you, the easiest way is this. The easiest way, of course, you could show that the Torah says that these commandments are forever. And in Zechariah 14, we see even the Goyim, the non-Jews, will be practicing keeping the mitzvah of Sukkot. And we see in Ezekiel, the Jews will be keeping the festival of Pesach in the Messianic age. It's just plain there. moreover, I want to emphasize this point. Using a sports metaphor. I'm not into sports. I'm just don't follow it. Doesn't interest me. I know for most people that's heresy, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. But I am, like every other person, inundated with all this talk about sports. Especially, in the postseason, approaching the postseason, whatever it is, and baseball, basketball, football, whatever, the Super Bowl, right? For the Super Bowl, there's such talk about the Super Bowl, how it's going to happen, who's going to win. There's 6 points, a layover, I don't know, a handicap and golf, whatever people discuss with great interest, because all you're doing is you just listen to the news, right? You put on the news. You're not interested in sports, but you have a moment where the newscaster stops and talks about the sports and what's going to happen. What do you think is happening? The big fight breaks out. Who do you think is going to win? And what's the point spread and whatever. It's just stuff. Okay. So it's a big deal. Certainly before the World Cup, huge deal. In Israel, it's crazy. Soccer is a religion. It is that way, incidentally, all over Asia and I think all over Europe. United States, it's still, I think, a sport that's growing. Here's the key. This is where I'm going with all this. So there's tremendous arguing among commentators of who's going to win this, Game 7, who's going to win this thing, who's going to make it to the finals, who's going to make it to post, who's going to make it to the pennant, who's going to win. But once the game is done, right, the final game is completed, right? Game 7 is finished, and whichever team wins. So the conversation changes, but no one's discussing who's going to win because it happened. There can be, of course, discussion of who was the most valuable player, or how did they win? Did they win like this or win like that? But no one talks about why, because it happened already, right? You know the information. You know who won, okay? We have the videotape. This is very critical. We have the text in TaNaCh explicitly, it's not an inference, explicitly in TaNaCh that when Mashiach comes, the Jews are going to keep all the mitzvahs and commandments. Explicitly. And Goyim are also going to keep many mitzvahs which they don't have to keep now. Explicitly. It's not an inference, straight away. Ezekiel 37, verse 24 and 25. They'll keep my statutes and my laws. Christians like to talk about that. God will take away the stony heart and give us a heart of flesh instead of a heart of stone. Ezekiel chapter 11 is an example. But they don't keep reading and says, and they'll keep my commandments and my laws. And Mamish says it. So it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. It really is. Mamish mind-blowing. So that's how ultimately you just take a TaNaCh, you open up, again, Ezekiel 37, 24 and 25. It's an important passage because all Christians agree that David, who is the Nasi, David, who is the prince, is the Messiah. And it says that you'll be keep my laws and statutes. It's done. And that's why Paul was creating a new religion. How did he get away with it? He got away with it because who were his audience? His audience were non-Jews who wouldn't. I'm talking right now, quoting passages, and I'm going to guess, don't be angry at me, my holy audience, but for many people watching me now, you didn't know that these passages exist. So if now we're living in a time when we have such access to information, which would have been unimaginable 100 years ago, unimaginable, right? Al-Achas come, and people still don't know these very simple, fundamental passages. Imagine in the ancient world where they didn't get internet. You couldn't get a book. A book had to be handwritten. Who had books? So he got away with it. He got away with murder. So that's how you do. You show open that they're going to keep the mitzvahs and so on, and that's the end of the whole thing. That's the simplest way to do it. But Paul definitely opposed ritual law completely. He held that the law is only a taskmaster. He says in Galatians that its only purpose was to get people to realize that they're a sinner, and then you turn to Jesus because you can't keep the law. What? And it took off because Paul was saying that you could be a Jew, kind of, meaning be heir to the promise like a Jew. That's how Galatians 3 ends. And you don't keep mitzvahs. It's like perfect. So there it is. It's perfect. It's a perfect storm, a nightmare to have something that just brings billions of people to idolatry. Thank you for your question.
November will mark 10 years TaNaCh Talk has actually been on the air. Very excited about that. To support my work here at this channel where I have all the different rabbis and teachers, and a lot of people go straight to the rabbis and support them, I also do need your help, so I really ask you to consider donating to this channel on a regular basis if you can. TaNaChTalk.com, there's a link there. There's also a Patreon link I'll probably have at the end of the video on an ad. I did an analysis over the past 6 months, and donation has dropped a lot on my side. Of course, I never talk about it. I only put the ad up there. I have gigs that I do in the evening to help pay the bills, and sometimes it requires more than less. But if you guys have some to spare, please send it in. I could certainly use it to help us out with this channel. Pakashi, you are live. Go right ahead with your question.
Oh, hi. Hello. Hello, Tovia. Actually, Rabbi Tovia Singer. Hello?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Oh. Hello, Tovia. Actually, Rabbi Tovia Singer. This is Ben from Japan. Last time I was going to talk about the commandments, but I got kind of cut off. But I think there's 11 commandments. Do you agree? Because
okay, Pakashi, do me a favor. First, go ahead and lay your question out there, and then you can explain the question by what you're saying now. Go ahead and put the question out there first.
Okay, my question is, do people have relationship with their God, or they just talking? But
that's a good question.
The important thing, for me, the most important thing is Exodus 20 from beginning, where God says His name, and He gives the commandments from number 1, 2, 3, 4 in order of importance, and the first half of it is about relationship with you and the God. I don't want to say the name because you got mad. And the Sabbath day, that's another more important thing than the rest of them. The rest of them should be just that should be obvious. The rest of them, but these ones is relationship with the God and true words from God. And the Sabbath day is so you don't become a slave again. Do you agree or?
So, just for clarification, this is the Messiah guy from Japan, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'll put that out there. There may be some context added to that because of that.
All right. Thank you for your question.
Go ahead and hang up. Tune in for your answer. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for listening to me.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So it's I didn't get every aspect of your question. It's a mitzvah min haTorah. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa, which is a commandment in the Torah, not just to worship Hashem, one God alone, and many mitzvahs associated with worship, but it's a special mitzvah to have devekus with Hashem, to cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be a part of your life. I mean, after all, we are deeply connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because He breathed into our nostrils His spirit, and every human being is created in the spirit of Hashem. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu desires to have a relationship with us because we're created in His image. We're a part of Him. Do you understand? It's very critical. So Devekus, to have, to cleave to Him is a mitzvah d'oraisa, and that is He should be a part of your life at every point. At every point you think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu and know that He loves you very much. And of course, it's the only challenge I think that people may come to is, how could He possibly pay attention to me? And a woman who's in an unenviable predicament in Bangkok, how does He pay attention to her as well? But we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a Kol Yochel, which means he can do everything, and that includes that he wants to be close to you. And therefore the Torah says explicitly that we're supposed to have devekus with Hashem. And the Torah says this in many places, but in the context is that you should be v'ahavtem es hager, you should love the stranger. This is Deuteronomy chapter 10. Which is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is his nature. He loves the weakest members of society. Why? Because you yourselves were servants, slaves in Egypt. As Hashem Elokecha tiro, oisai savoid, you should fear only the Lord your God, and you should worship him alone. Uvoi sidbok, and you should cleave to him, and you should only swear in his name. So there's a mitzvah in Torah to have a personal relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he loves you. There's one very intriguing part of this, and that is that we, rather than God, very much control the nature of our relationship. That may seem counterintuitive. But as it turns out, we can never hope to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as much as he loves us and cleaves to us. Because he has an infinite, the Almighty, blessed be his holy name, has an infinite amount of love, compassion, and connection. He's pure truth, and we're limited, right? And in Jewish thought, the lesser of the two in a relationship, one person says, I love you, and the person, I like you. The one who is the lesser of the two, essentially, is the one who's going to define the nature of the relationship. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's love for you and desire to be close to you is infinite. Now the question is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to embrace that walk with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It's beautiful. Present in your life all times, or chas v'chalila, or heaven forbid, abandon that relationship, which means you're cutting out, you're removing a part of who you are, and that is someone who is designed, who's wired for a connection to Hashem, because we're creating the image of God. So it's a mitzvah in Torah to have a separate mitzvah in Torah, to cleave to Hashem, to be close to Hashem, and to have a personal relationship with Hashem. After all, he's not only the God of creation, which we're reminded of in the Torah, but he's also the God of history. And therefore, he is deeply involved in your life. Thank you for your question.
Okay, Corey, you are live on the air. Go right ahead with your question.
Okay. Well, hey, thanks for your guys' work that you do. I know that you put a lot of work into it. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Rabbi, if you could have a little bit of patience with me. You guys were speaking about resurrection, and I just had a four-parter for you. I know that's amazing, but I guess my first question would be, it's kind of a four-part question I have. I'll be quick. Will the resurrection occur after Mashiach has arrived?
Go ahead. What are the other three parts?
And those who are resurrected, are these only Jewish people who have died before he comes, or is it of all races? And then, what happens to those who are not resurrected and those who are alive? You mentioned the nations, the 10 Gentiles grabbing the sleeve of a Jew, saying, oh, we see that you're correct now. That humanity that exists at that moment in time, is this an eternal existence for them as well, or is this entire thing an eternal existence? Or did I understand you that, will the Mashiach, I know that he has children, you had mentioned, but does he pass away? So,
Right.
Okay, go ahead and hang up now
Great
to your
question.
answer. Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, so that's a great question.
Perfect.
And as it turns out, there's a dearth of information on the topics you touched upon. The resurrection of the dead is mentioned in TaNaCh a number of times. It's even referenced in the book of Deuteronomy, famously in chapter 32, explicitly in a number of passages, including Isaiah 26, verse 19, Daniel 12:2. However, TaNaCh doesn't tell us in what order they occur, but it is clear that the resurrection of the dead takes place at some point after the Mashiach comes. There are a number of opinions on this topic. And in fact, many of our sages view the Messianic age occurring we'll divide into two periods. One is Yemais HaMashiach, which means the Messianic age, which is followed by a period we can call the Olam Haba, which is a period where we have the resurrection. There's also a discussion of who exactly resurrects from the dead. Obviously, the faithful, the loyal, but let me explain why there's a resurrection. And then this will help you understand how it works. Like, why would the dead resurrect? And I think most people view Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead, as a way of undoing death. Or, I mean, given that people fear death, fear the grave, people can prepare wills and purchase graves and so on, but it's very hard for people to contemplate dying. We know we're going to die, but it's so traumatic, most people can't even think about their own death for more than a few seconds before they have to sort of get it out of their head. It's very, very traumatic. I mean, the notion that it's like you're at a party and suddenly you get a tap on the shoulder and told that you have to leave. Worse, that the party goes on without you. So the idea I think people think is that, well, you're told you have to leave the party temporarily, but you get to come back to the party. That's not exactly correct, but it's certainly the way I think many people view it. What's happening is that when a person performs mitzvot and fulfills the Torah and studies Torah, so what happens is their physical body, which is the same stuff that turtles are made of and cats are made of, we share well over 90% of our DNA with these creatures. When we perform mitzvot and specifically engage in the study of Torah, so what that does is it infuses our physical body with holiness, with sanctity. So just like if you took a tree, an oak tree, and chopped it down, if you smelt the wood, it doesn't really have a strong fragrance. The oak is a very valuable material because it's really useful for building, and you could fashion wood into a barrel, right? Imagine you make a barrel out of oak wood, right? And then once you finish it, you then fill it with wine, fill it with perfume, right? So what happens after time when the wine is consumed and the perfume is consumed? So then you can then smell the oak, and the oak has become the oak wood, which otherwise would have been, suddenly takes on the fragrance of the wine. It becomes permeated. And now the oak of this barrel now smells of the beautiful fragrance of perfume. Well, that's what happens with a physical body. That's why the resurrection is essentially a necessity. Those who devote their lives to mitzvot, those who devote their lives to Torah, Chazal, our sages of blessed memory, based on Isaiah 26, verse 19, very clearly state that the resurrection, or a person who's worthy of resurrecting, means that they were amelim b'Torah, that they was engaged in the study of Torah, and in between those, enable others to study Torah. So there are people who are not mechuyev to study Torah constantly, but do, or make sure that their spouse studies Torah, make sure that Torah goes on in your community. A non-Jew, people think a non-Jew is not supposed to study Torah. That's not my view at all. But what it means is just a non-Jew doesn't say the Torah was given to the non-Jews, it was given to the Jews. But non-Jews must understand Torah to know how to keep the 7 Noachide laws, which really are about 100 commandments. There are about 100 commandments incumbent on a non-Jew. They're just broken down to 7 categories. How do you know the laws of torts, which all apply to non-Jews? The only way you could know that is by studying Torah. So it's very important to learn the laws that are pertain to the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and to ensure that Jewish people who are obligated to study Torah, that they can. So our literature is very clear about that. The performance of mitzvahs, and now it all makes sense of why. What's happened is that our bodies, what are we? We're walking protoplasm. We're basically made up of the stuff that of stardust, right? Just like your dog is, right? So what's the nafkamina? What's the difference between you and your dog? That is that you have a neshama. You're creating the image of God. As much as we love dogs, we generally do, right? A dog doesn't have free will. It doesn't have a neshama, and a dog, no matter how intelligent your dog is, does not believe in God. And moreover, it's not that your dog rejected the notion of believing in God. He has no idea what that even means. And if you could have a conversation with your dog, if you could speak dog, and you told your dog about God, he would have no idea what you're talking about. No idea. Why? Because he doesn't have the receptor for it any more than your computer from 1980 would be able to pick up a Bluetooth signal. It can't, because there's no Bluetooth receptor for it. You follow? There is a machlokes, there is a disagreement about how long people live after the resurrection of the dead. What happens to the generation that's alive when Tchias Mason, when the resurrection occurs? Do they have to die? And then, so this is a matter of dispute. I don't know the answer to the question. TaNaCh is silent on this. That the Mashiach would live forever, well, one can infer that because the Messiah has children, see Ezekiel 46, verse 17. So, and that they have an inheritance, one can infer that perhaps the Mashiach will die and then his children will be king. Because that's essentially, the Mashiach is going to be two things. He's going to be the king, a Davidic king, heir to the Davidic throne, to the promises of 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12 through 16. But he's also going to be the chief rabbi of the Jewish people. He's going to be teaching Torah. He's going to be not only to the Jews, but teach Torah to the Goyim as well. And they're going to listen to him. See Isaiah chapter 2, see Micha, who lived the same time, chapter 4. Micha is quoting Isaiah. Micha is quoting Isaiah there. If you ask me, how do I know that? I'll tell you later. So there is a disagreement about how precisely this will occur. And when it happens, and please God, it will happen very soon, which I believe, then we'll know, we'll understand. Just like there are many prophecies that are unfolding now, which 150 years ago would have been inconceivable, could not imagine how Zechariah 12 could unfold. Now we know exactly. So there are different opinions on the answer to those questions, and I can't tell you that. I'm not God's manager, I'm a salesman. So this is in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hands. All life belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's the one that gives life and takes life, Deuteronomy chapter 32. And so there are different views on this. But the important thing to know is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trustworthy, and those who are loyal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and are Isaac, who engage in the study of Torah and the performance of the mitzvos and enable others to do likewise, are assured a Tchias HaMesim, which means the physical resurrection of the dead from the bones. And do not be cremated, and no one should ever be cremated. From the bones is the resurrection. And if you have a will that says you should be cremated, change it today. And tell those that you love to change that day. Do not be buried with dogs rather than be cremated. Never, 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 never. I'm just letting you know that. Never honor the request of a cremation. I know you're going to ask me, I don't have all the answers to your questions. I always get those questions, but my grandmother was cremated. I can't answer that. Just never, you are not allowed to honor such a request, and every human being should be buried when they're 120, never cremated. And when Mashiach, it's happening now. Like, we're in the midst of a seder of events, and it'll become clear to us exactly the order, how long, and so on. That will become known to us. But why does a person resurrect from the dead? And how does a person ensure that they will enjoy Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection? That's very clear. It's a loyalty to the Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to have Devegas with Hashem, study of Torah, and making it possible for others to study Torah. May we see this remarkable moment quickly in our time. Thank you.
Moving right into the next caller. Okay, caller, you're live on the air. Go ahead with your question.
Okay. My name is Ellie, and I'm from the U.S., but I live in Malta now.
Welcome, Ellie.
I grew up as a JW. Thank you. I grew up as a JW, but recently I've been listening to Rabbi Tovia's videos, and I've been questioning and researching things, and it's been so overwhelming. I feel like everything I thought I knew has come crashing down. So my question is about the timeline of Jesus' death in Mark 14. There it says that the disciples went to prepare the place to celebrate Passover on the day that the sacrifice was made. And that evening they had dinner, then he was arrested and died, and the next evening was Shabbat. I looked up the Jewish calendar, and on year 33 CE, the 15th of Nisan fell on Shabbat. So, sounds like something in the story doesn't add up. Did they get the day wrong of Jesus' death, or is the gospel wrong and they didn't celebrate Passover? They had another dinner? It just breaks my heart that I feel like I've been living a lie all these years, and I'm very grateful to you guys. So thank you so much.
That's wonderful. Okay, you can go ahead now to your answer. Thank you for your call.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Don't we have the sweetest callers? I wouldn't trade with anyone.
Definitely.
I'm just saying to you, the viewers, I wouldn't trade you guys for anything. We have just beautiful people who engage in the study of Torah with us. So thank you for your question. The question is enormously problematic. Mark 14 does not indicate what year Jesus was crucified on. And one may say it's too complicated to explain. That according to the synoptics, Jesus was executed in the year 30, and according to John, possibly 33, the case could be made, and that's why those 2 years are given. So one could not extrapolate anything from reading Mark 14, which contains the Passover with the disciples, the Last Supper, and all that stuff. What is very clear is that the Last Supper was a Passover Seder. And that is dramatically different than John. That's the key takeaway. So according to all 4 Gospels, Jesus was executed on Friday. But according to Mark, Matthew, and Luke, the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus was executed on the first day of Pesach. So the first day of Passover was a Friday. Okay, got that? Because the first day of Passover is the 15th day of Nisan, the first month. According to John, Jesus was executed on the day before Passover, and therefore, according to John, Jesus was executed on the 13th day of Nisan, and the Last Supper that we find in the book of John, in John chapter 13, it was not a Passover Seder. And just to be sure, look it up for yourself, there is no Passover Seder, and there's no Eucharist. That's what's so striking. Like, where is the Eucharist in the Synoptic Gospels, where you would expect to find it? In the Last Supper, right? This is all very simple stuff, right? But where is the Last Supper in John's Gospel? It isn't in chapter 13. What do you mean? And what's going on in chapter 13? That's where Jesus is washing the feet of his disciples. So this is far more convoluted than you think it is. And if you want to find the Eucharist in John's Gospel, you will find it. You won't find it in the Last Supper, because John has a completely different view of on what day Jesus was crucified on. Now, John has Jesus crucified on a Friday, but that Friday is the eve of Pesach, because he's tying Jesus' death to when the lamb, the Passover lamb, is executed. This is very important to John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke either disagreed with this view that Jesus should be associated with the lamb, or didn't know anything about it. I think the latter is more probable. Hard to say, but because Joannian Christology says that Jesus was the Lamb of God, see John 1:29, see John 1:36. Therefore, the author of the fourth gospel would have Jesus crucified when the Passover lamb was crucified. Because Matthew, Mark, and Luke know nothing about an association of Jesus with the lamb. Like behold the Lamb of God, right? You won't find that in the Synoptics. So, when you want to be sure that you've got it right, what you want to do is you want to do a check. It's like in math, when you solve an algebraic equation, you can actually go back and check it and just replace X and Y with whatever, and then see if it all works. So that's what you want to do, and that's why in John 13, and this is so convoluted that it's much more convoluted than you think. And God bless you that you have the courage to do this, because the JWs are kind of the Christian sects. They're kind of one of the more culty groups. They just are. I'm guessing, and I'm just guessing, that you might be a second or third generation member of the JWs. I'm not for sure, but usually the JW group is so culty to the first generation that people actually join it, that it's only their children and grandchildren that can sort of make sense out of it and go, wait, because they're a church that controls your thought and your movements and everything, and you can be this fellow thrown out on your head very quickly. It's a little different than other Christian groups. So that you can think so independently is mind-blowing. So it's really much more convoluted. Strikingly, this is one of the weird things, and that is that Paul associates Jesus with the Passover lamb. So we have Paul doing that in his letters, and then the Synoptic Gospels knowing nothing about it or disagreeing with it. And then John, there it is, it pops up right there. And of course, it's in the book of Revelation, which adopts this Joannian theology. And that's why, incidentally, if you look carefully at the Last Supper story as presented in John 13, when Judas Iscariot is taking the money bag with him at the Last Supper, the people there, the disciples who were present, really were wondering and scratching their head, and why is he taking the money? What is he going to do with the money? And they conclude, it's right in the text, please look it up for yourself, that surely he's going to use the money to purchase the things that are necessary for the meal, which is the next night. You understand? That story of John 13:29 cannot appear in the Synoptic Gospels. Can't. Why? Because why would anyone think that Judas Iscariot is looking to purchase the necessities for the Passover Seder when you've just eaten it? Or, the Jews refusing to enter the praetorium of Pontius Pilate, lest they become defiled and can't eat from the Passover. Only that can happen in John. So this is so convoluted because what's happening is that all the writers of the New Testament have theological views, and they simply adjust, create, massage datum in order to match their theology. And that's why you have all this stuff that's completely convoluted. Why don't Christians know it? Because they don't read the Christian Bible very well. Very few do. And usually people read Matthew and then Mark, Luke, and John, and it kind of sounds the same. John sounds really different, but it's kind of the same. People just, well, of course. And they don't really examine it properly. That's even in the modern world. In the ancient world, for sure they didn't know. And in the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, which are the two largest Christian denominations by far, their adherents are not encouraged to read the Bible, and rather they are stuck with a highly liturgical service in church, which means that it's a highly structured service where people study the passages that the priest encourages, or speaks about, rather than. There are some very studious Christians for sure, but they're not the norm. They're the outliers. So this is very convoluted. It's very clear from the book of Mark that Passover came out on first day of Passover was the Last Supper, and that Jesus was crucified on the first day of Pesach, which is a day different than John. And this is going to have a huge, wide implications for Christians when celebrating Easter in the early centuries of the church. And this is completely convoluted. So thank you for your question. My prayers are with you because you're a J witness. Even though I said something about the group that you come from, that they're culty, the one thing is that they don't believe in the doctrine of the Trinity, which means it's the kind of group that might encourage you not to just believe everything you're told. So thank you so much for your question.
Okay. Rabbi, there's 5 minutes left, but that might not be enough to cover the question.
Sure.
Go ahead and take
one
it.
more.
Okay, so the caller hung up, but Gabriel Sanders, our resident Hebrew scholar, has actually sent in a question. I told him if we ever had time to get it. He sent it about 3 weeks ago. I told him I'd try to get it in eventually. I guess he's not able to call. So the question is, the thief on the cross being with JC, and he says, "Today in paradise you will be with me." Yet didn't the New Testament say that after his death he went to preach to the souls in hell?
Yeah, so these things don't necessarily agree. So that comes up in the book of Luke. Unlike, for example, Matthew, where both the criminals whom Jesus was crucified with did not believe, in Luke, Jesus assures the disciples, the thief that says, to the other guys, says, we're here for a good reason. We're being crucified because we had it coming, but this guy is completely innocent. So one guy believes. That's what's different about Luke's passion narrative. Of course, he never got baptized. How did he get saved without baptism? So he said, today you'll be with me in paradise. So that Jesus was spending the weekend in a spiritual Bahamas. He was spending the weekend in a spiritual Bali, right? But ideas do develop in the church that Jesus spent that time in the pit of hell, and that idea does permeate many Christian thinkers, and who elaborate on this in paintings of Jesus saving people from hell and so on. And the point is, something that I think comes up very frequently on this show is they don't have to agree. It doesn't matter. It's not relevant. I mean, Luke says that Elizabeth and Zechariah, the parents of John the Baptist, never sinned in Luke 1:6. Paul says that everybody sins. See Romans chapter 3. Well, why aren't Christians just canceling their membership with their church? Because they don't agree. Because they don't even know that. In fact, right now, as we're speaking, Christians who are listening to me are opening up their Bibles and looking this up and trying to figure out how is this possible that Elizabeth and Zechariah kept all the commandments blamelessly. Blamelessly? Well, how does that comport? So, that's a minor issue but it's very attractive. The notion that Jesus goes into the pit of hell, incidentally, is a theme found frequently in Greek tragedies. It's found the idea that the gods go into hell, and I write about this in both of my volumes of Let's Get Biblical, that this, tracing this theme of the gods going to the pit of hell to rescue people who shouldn't be there, shouldn't be in the grave. So it's easy to understand how that idea would quickly infiltrate, the church. But if you're going to ask me, how does one passage in Christian thought agree with another idea in Christianity, I'm going to tell you they don't agree, and they don't have to agree. It doesn't matter. It's at that moment what feels right. And what feels right is that if one thief recognizes, it means he's a criminal, but he saw the truth, it doesn't even matter that in Matthew, neither of the criminals who were crucified with Jesus didn't believe. Like, why don't Christians ask that? They don't care. It's not that they don't care, it's just they don't see it. Because each segment of the canon is there to give you a certain feel, a certain high. And if it disagrees with another, it doesn't matter, because Christian theology is not univocal. It's highly variegated. Why don't Christians notice that the book of James differs dramatically from the letters of Paul? They just don't. Luther noticed it. He didn't want to include it in his German translation. But, that's Luther. Luther was a horrible person, but he was a Christian scholar. And so only those kinds of people. So therefore, just people don't notice these things. Anyway, thank you very much for your question. And please do keep my dad in your prayers.
Very good. Okay, Rabbi, thank you for your time. It's a good show today. Thank you for the callers calling in. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, turn on all notifications, that way you don't miss anything as it comes through. So we'll see you guys on the other side. Rabbi, shalom, shalom. Take care, everybody.
Hello, my dear friends. Hope this message finds you well. If you like the way this channel is going, and the channel has been a blessing to you, please consider supporting the channel by going to the website, TaNaChTalk.com. TaNaChTalk.com. Thank you once again for your time and for supporting TaNaCh Talk. Shalom.
חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה